Musically, there was a great synergy, but romantically, it sounded like a nightmare.
Kind of was, because I just was this person constantly looking.
There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from standing beside someone who cannot reach you. For Tony Tennille, that loneliness wore a captain's hat and played keyboards like a genius. For nearly 4 decades, she stood next to Daryl Dragon, the man the world knew as a captain, sharing stages, recording studios, television sets, and a marriage bed. And yet, by her own admission, she spent most of those years searching for a love that lived just out of reach. This is not a story about a couple who stopped loving each other. It is something far more heartbreaking than that. It is the story of a woman who never stopped trying, and a man who, through no simple fault of his own, could never quite let her in. When Captain and Tennille burst onto the American music scene in the mid-1970s, they seemed to embody everything fans wanted from a pop duo. Tony's voice was warm and elastic, capable of wrapping around a lyric like an embrace. Daryl's keyboard arrangements were clean, inventive, and deeply musical. Together, they crafted a sound that felt simultaneously polished and intimate, as though they were singing directly to you from the other side of a candlelit dinner table. Their debut single, Love Will Keep Us Together, shot to #1 in 1975 and held the top spot for 4 weeks. It won them a Grammy for Record of the Year. Follow-up hits like Muskrat Love, The Way I Want to Touch You, and Do That to Me One More Time cemented their status as one of the defining acts of the decade. They were everywhere, on the radio, on television, on the covers of fan magazines, and they looked to all the world like a couple deeply in love. That image was not entirely manufactured. Tony did love Daryl. She has said so repeatedly, even now, with a clarity that only comes after years of honest reflection. The feelings were real. The music was genuine. What was missing was a reciprocity, the emotional return that Tony craved and that Daryl, for complex reasons rooted deep in his past, simply could not provide. Daryl Dragon was born into music royalty of a kind. His father, Carmen Dragon, was a well-known conductor and arranger, a man of considerable talent and equally considerable emotional severity. Growing up in that household, Daryl learned early that excellence was expected and affection was rationed. His father was described by those who knew the family as critical, mercurial, and demanding, the kind of parent whose approval you pursued without ever quite catching it. The lessons Daryl absorbed in childhood were not the kind you unlearn easily. He became a man who internalized everything, who expressed himself through music because music asked nothing back, who wore emotional distance like armor. His reticence was not coldness. Those who knew him well understood that, but it functioned like coldness in the context of a marriage. Tony could feel the warmth somewhere beneath the surface, just close enough to tantalize, just far enough to ache. He was also, by his own admission, deeply uncomfortable with the public-facing side of their fame. In interviews, he spoke of feeling out of place in the entertainment spotlight, of being mainly a musician who struggled to perform the role of celebrity. While Tony radiated natural ease on camera, she was charming, funny, expressive, instantly likable. Daryl retreated into himself. Audiences noticed the contrast and largely interpreted it as endearing. Tony lived it as something lonelier. There is a famous anecdote that Tony has shared more than once, small in its details but enormous in what it reveals. During a trip to Rome, the couple visited the Sistine Chapel. Inside that sacred space, with Michelangelo's masterwork arching above them, Daryl refused to remove his signature captain's hat. Tony found herself caught between her respect for her husband's personal boundaries and the social expectation of the moment. She chose to leave the chapel. It is such a minor thing on its surface. A hat, a chapel, a moment of awkwardness. But Tony tells it because it captures something essential about what it felt like to be married to Daryl Dragon. You were always navigating around the edges of a wall you could never quite scale. Here's one of the most poignant ironies in the entire story. The songs that made Tony Tennille and Captain and Tennille famous were, in many cases, direct expressions of Tony's longing for exactly the kind of love she was receiving. The Way I Want to Touch You was written by Tony. So was Do That to Me One More Time. These were not generic pop confections assembled by professional songwriters to meet a commercial brief. They came from somewhere real. They describe a desire for closeness, for tenderness, for the specific intimacy of romantic love between two people who truly see each other. Daryl, by his own later admission, rarely paid close attention to the lyrics. For him, music was pure form, melody, arrangement, rhythm, structure. The emotional content of the words was Tony's domain. He could play those songs brilliantly, produce them masterfully, perform them night after night, and remain essentially untouched by what they were saying. The music that told the world they were deeply in love was, in the most private sense, a letter from Tony to a man who never quite read it. This does not diminish the art. If anything, it deepens it. Knowing what Tony was reaching for when she wrote those songs, and what she was not finding at home, gives them a bittersweet undertow that the original audiences could not have suspected. They were love songs, and they were also quietly grief songs. Songs about what she wanted and what kept slipping away. Tony has been candid about the circumstances surrounding their decision to marry. It was not, she has explained, a moment of passionate certainty. Financial considerations played a role. Practicalities intervened. The marriage happened because it made sense in a number of ways that had little to do with the kind of romantic readiness that might have made it more sustainable. This does not mean she entered it without feeling. Tony has never suggested that. She loved Daryl. She believed in the possibility of what they could build together. But the foundation was more complicated than a fairy tale, and the complications did not resolve with time. They deepened. What Tony describes, when she speaks honestly about those years, is a particular exhaustion of loving someone who cannot love you back in the way you need. It is not dramatic exhaustion. There are no screaming matches in her account, no volcanic confrontations. It is quieter and, in some ways, more wearing than that. It is a tiredness that comes from reaching, again and again, towards someone who never quite reaches back. From waiting for the words, "I love you," to be spoken by a man who, in nearly 4 decades of marriage, apparently never said them. She understood, intellectually, why he couldn't. She traced it back to his father, to his upbringing, to the way he'd been shaped by an environment that did not model emotional openness. She held compassion alongside her disappointment. But compassion, however genuine, does not fill the space where love's expression should live. It would be a mistake to tell this story as though Daryl Dragon were simply a cold or withholding man who took Tony's devotion and gave nothing back. The picture is more complicated, and Tony herself has been careful to complicate it. He was a man of deep philosophical bent. He spoke of a friendship with a 96-year-old mentor who had taught him principles he carried through life. Speak good, think good, do good. This was not a man without inner life. It was a man whose inner life was so deeply interior that it rarely found its way outward into the ordinary currencies of affection, the words, the gestures, the daily warmth that sustains a marriage. Their musical partnership, at its best, offered something that their personal relationship could not. In the recording studio, in performance, they met on equal footing. They communicated in the language they both understood best. Tony has spoken of those moments as a kind of connection, real, sustaining, and irreplaceable. It was not everything she needed, but it was not nothing. It was, perhaps, the truest language they shared. There were also the quieter moments of daily life, where Daryl's presence carried its own kind of meaning. Tony took on much of the practical management of their shared existence. The logistics, the scheduling, the social navigation that his reserved nature made difficult for him. She did this not with resentment, but with a kind of steadiness that speaks to her character. She understood who he was. She chose to show up for him anyway. In 2014, after 39 years of marriage, Tony Tennille filed for divorce. She was 73 years old. The announcement surprised many fans who had long held Captain and Tennille as a symbol of enduring partnership. It should not, perhaps, have been surprising. The distance had been there all along. What changed, it seems, was Tony's capacity to keep living inside it. She has spoken about the divorce without bitterness, which is itself a remarkable thing. There is no villain in her telling. There is a woman who spent decades hoping for something she could not manufacture in another person, and who finally, late in life, chose to stop hoping in that particular way. It was not a rupture so much as an honest reckoning. The memoir she wrote to process the experience took 2 years to complete. That timeline tells you something about the weight of what she was sorting through. These were not simple memories. They were layered with love and loss and the strange grief that comes from mourning something, a version of love, a version of marriage that was never quite fully present even when it was supposedly intact. What happened after the divorce is, in its own way, more revealing than what happened during the marriage. Tony did not disappear from Daryl's life. She maintained contact, speaking with him regularly, every week or 10 days by her account. She kept watch over his well-being from a distance, concerned about his daily life, attentive to his needs in ways that exceeded what any ordinary definition of ex-spouse would require. She described him, in the years following their separation, as not ever happy but fine. That phrase, not ever happy but fine, captures something essential about the man she had spent nearly 4 decades beside. He had settled into a kind of equilibrium. He was managing. He was not flourishing in the way she had always hoped he might, but he was enduring. For Daryl Dragon, endurance may have been the most authentic form of contentment available to him. Her ongoing care for him after the divorce has been interpreted by some as evidence that the love never left. That interpretation is probably correct, though the love had transformed into something different from what it had been. It was no longer the yearning, romantic love of a woman hoping her husband would finally turn toward her. It was something quieter and more settled, a care rooted in long knowledge, in shared history, in the simple fact of having known someone deeply even when that knowing came with so much pain. This, too, is a kind of love. It may even be a more durable kind than the one she had originally sought. Captain and Tennille's music has not faded. Love Will Keep Us Together remains one of the best-selling singles of the 1970s. Their songs still surface on oldie stations and streaming playlists, still carry people back to specific summers and particular feelings. The music did what great pop music does. It captured something true about human longing and made it last. What Tony Tennille has added to that legacy, through her honesty about their private life, is a different kind of lasting truth. She has pulled back the curtain on what celebrity romance actually looked like from the inside, not to diminish what they created, but to tell the whole story. The music was real. The love was real. The pain was also real. None of these things cancels out the others. Her willingness to speak openly about the emotional gaps in her marriage has resonated with audiences in ways she perhaps did not anticipate. People recognize the specific loneliness she describes, the experience of loving someone who cannot fully love you back, of maintaining hope long past the point where hope has proven itself unfounded. It is not a rare experience. It is, in fact, one of the more common forms of human heartbreak. Tony's candor gave it a name and a face. Daryl Dragon passed away in January 2019 at the age of 76 from renal failure. Tony was with him, whatever the complications of their marriage, whatever the distances they had never managed to close. She was there at the end. That, too, says something about the nature of what they shared. The story of Tony Tennille and Daryl Dragon resists easy conclusions. It is not a cautionary tale about marrying the wrong person. It is not a celebration of endurance for its own sake. It is something more honest and more complicated than either of those frames. It is the story of two people who found each other, made something beautiful together, and lived for decades inside the particular friction of their differences. One of them needed more than the other could give. The other gave what he was capable of giving, which was considerable, just not in the currency she most needed. Neither of them was wrong. Exactly. They were simply, in the ways that matter most inside a marriage, not quite able to reach each other. Tony Tennille has spoken of her years with Daryl, without the protective coloring of nostalgia or the sharpness of resentment. She has told the truth about what it was like, and the truth is both sad and oddly beautiful. It is sad because of everything she hoped for and didn't find. It is beautiful because she kept showing up anyway, for the music, for the partnership, for the man himself, even after the marriage ended. The songs they made together are still playing somewhere right now. Somebody is hearing Love Will Keep Us Together for the first time or the 100th time and feeling something genuine about it. That is a miracle of good music. It carries its emotion forward long after the people who made it have moved on or separated or come to the end of their story. Tony Tennille knows, better than anyone, that the love in those songs was real. She wrote it. She felt it. She lived on the far side of it for nearly 4 decades. And she is still standing, clear-eyed, honest, and unbroken, to tell us what it cost and what it was worth.